Welcome back to Jess of the North. We are going to do our seed starting plan for 2024. This has been my process. Some of these things might work for you, some of them might not. This is the buffet, and you take what you want and use what works for you, and whatever doesn't, feel free to just not use. That's fine. I've come across this process because I need to narrow down my choices and decide from those choices that I narrowed it down what will fit in my garden spaces. So it is one thing to know that I want tomatoes, but which varieties of tomatoes, and how many tomatoes can I actually fit in the garden space. The other day I went through all of my seed packets. I have a lot of seed packets, and I narrowed it down to these. So I have 2 of these containers plus this box, and these are what I will be growing this season. I take those and I slowly plug it into an Excel sheet or a spreadsheet. You can use whatever works for you. Google Docs is free. We have Macs, so numbers comes just free on my software. If you have Excel, excellent. Any of those work. That is perfectly fine. But what I do to start the season is I actually review what went well for last season. So for me, the things that went, or the things that struck me, was that I didn't have anything that I thought of as like outstanding. Like there was a year that I was, I think, 5 pounds short of 200 pounds worth of tomatoes. I didn't have that this season. So nothing to me stood out except maybe the sheer volume of storage squash that I grew. And it grew well. Like it performed very well. So I wrote that down. My amaranth also grew well. And then I had what I would think of as a moderate amount of success with cabbage and tomatoes. Like I had enough to meet my needs, but not enough to like store copious amounts. So like it was fine. There wasn't an issue with that. All of those things fall into the good category. My peppers, I had a lot of aphids this season, specifically with my peppers. And that's not something I've had before. If I've had aphids, they've typically been on tomatoes, and I've been able to sort of deal with that better than I did this year. The other thing is the garden wasn't as full as I would like. Part of that was inconsistent fertilizing and inconsistent watering. I think everyone starts the season with the best of intentions about, I'm going to stick on this schedule, and it's kind of not who I am as a person. So I did my best. It was fine, but it wasn't like optimal. So the other thing I got was a good amount of cucumbers. I did only grow them for fresh eating. We had more than enough, so that was like 3 plants total. And I did not have enough onions. So last year I was self-sufficient in garlic and in onions. This year my garlic was also fine, so I'm still self-sufficient in that. But my onions did not perform as well, and I think that's because I did not provide them a dedicated space to be in full sun. I had them just tucked in where I had space. So this is just the overview of everything I remember about how the garden season went, pros and cons, things I want to work towards, which leads me to wants for 2024. So I want to be self-sufficient in onions and garlic. I want enough tomatoes for fresh and canning, so that means more tomato plants, or more plentiful varieties, depending on how you think about that. I really want a colorful bowl of cherry tomatoes. Sometimes I abbreviate tomatoes as Toms, so if your name is Tom, sorry. Fresh eating cucumbers, so I did that this past year. So I specifically wrote down that it took 3 plants. I could probably get by with 2, but 3, just to be safe. I only had a handful of carrots this past season, and that was similar to the onions, where I just sort of tucked them in to spots. I didn't set aside like a dedicated square for them. So I want more carrots this coming season. And then I want to fix my irrigation lines. It was something I'd intended to do this year and obviously did not. So I also, because I added garden beds, would need to reconfigure the setup anyway. So it's time. And then I would also like to invest in like a brass siphon. This is used for putting it in your fertilizer bucket, and it feeds through the irrigation line directly to the plants at a specified ratio. I think it's usually like 16:1. Brass siphons come in different price points, different ways you can like connect them. You just search brass siphon and it's very self-explanatory, available through different kinds of retailers. So by investing in the irrigation lines and the brass siphon at the beginning of the season, that would help with the garden being as full as I would want it to be. Helps with my consistent watering and fertilizing because it's easier. So the easier you can make this on yourself, the better the outputs will be. The other things are mostly involved in planning, which is what we're doing today. So this is my basic, how did the season go? What are my key takeaways? And all of these are things that are within my control. I can't record anything that's about weather or like I have no control over that. So these are things that I can plan for. Once I have this recorded and I have my seed varieties selected, one by one I go through the packets and then I put each crop in the Excel spreadsheet. What this does is it helps me narrow down the types of varieties that I'm putting where. It makes me conscious of the kinds of space that I have. And because the Excel spreadsheet is easy to just like, okay, I need to copy paste this thing, I need to delete. It's a fast tool compared to this experience, which is also perfectly valid. This is just an overview of my garden beds. It's not 100% to scale, but it's like 90% there. It's totally fine. It's good enough for what I need. So this section is the main garden beds. This is the side of the kennel bed that's not taken over by cilantro. This is what the potato bed was this past season. Technically it's a little bit wider, but it doesn't have solid sides right now, so it's kind of permeable. And then we have the north greenhouse bed and the south greenhouse bed. So I have these labeled in my journal so you can see what they are, as well as oriented in a way that makes sense to me. So to me, north is the top of the page, which I've denoted with this N. South would be the bottom of the page, so I've got south. And then this is the layout of the main garden. The kennel bed also is oriented north, south. And then I tend to abbreviate greenhouse as GH. That just also makes sense in my head. So I've got north greenhouse bed on this side, south greenhouse bed on this side. So there's a layer of continuity here for me. So this allows me to do finer details of placement. So once I'm done with the Excel spreadsheet, I tend to come over here and be more specific. This is what I take out to the garden with me. I don't tend to take my electronics out there just because I get easily distracted and I don't want to leave it someplace where I'll accidentally spray it with water. That sounds like a bad plan. So the garden plan details are done in this. The next level of seed starting, so you can. It is perfectly acceptable to plan your garden once for the season and you're done. But if you want the most out of your harvest, you can do at least 3 copies and say, okay, once my spring crops are done, this is the date I'm going to put in my summer crops. And then once that summer crop is done, here's what I'm going to put in my fall crops. So you can have effectively 3 plans for the season. It's whatever you're comfortable with this. If this is your first season gardening, then I would highly recommend that you at least start with 1 season. You plan 1 planting. That is a good skill to master. If you're on your second season, I would try experimenting with something as simple as radishes or lettuces, salad greens, things like that have a shorter lifespan in your garden beds and allow you to see what your season provides for you. If you're already at the level where like you do this routinely, then you're doing excellent and I'm very proud of you. This is something that I try to master every year for the last like 3 years. These are the things that I decided where they were going first. So these are things that take up the most space. Everything in this box has a dedicated spot in my Excel sheet. It is where it belongs. For sure, I know where it's going, at least guidelines wise. I've got a broad strokes plan. These things are more something that I am going to start them and fill them in. So in my Excel sheet, I have listings for where I want to put beets, but I didn't get down to like variety specifics. Same thing with carrots. And then things like herbs and flowers, those are very easy to just put into blank spaces in the garden. And I do deliberately leave blank spaces in my garden plan because I like having that flexibility. Every gardening season, I have some sort of just general vague image that I want. And last season for 2022, it was that I really wanted the stadium seating of the amaranth, the Celiosa flowers, the gomphrena flowers, and then like bush beans in the front. Some of that went to plan and some of it did not. My Celiosa did not germinate well. The gomphrena, I got patchy germination, and the amaranth performed great. So it was an excellent screen for the kennel bed. This season, I've got two things that I would like to do. One of them is that squash arch over the kennel bed area. And the other is I enjoyed growing cosmos this past season. I also enjoyed growing Nigelia. And I want both of those together in a bed. I think that would be beautiful. They both have this like feathery air to them. So I'm going to scatter some seeds together for those two things and put them in the same bed. And I'm going to put it on the west entrance to the greenhouse because I liked how those blew in the breeze. I also walk that pathway a lot. My garden benches are near that spot. So thinking visually how I want the garden to look is an important step for me as I'm sitting down to do my garden plan. As I was going through my seed packets, the things that I was not sure that I wanted to do, I have set aside here. So I grew wonderberries and ground cherries this past season. Wonderberries were a pain to harvest, but they were delicious. A pain because like the plants branch, and so like, but the berries are delicate. So getting a hold of those things without damaging them, and the plants were beautiful. Like I actively enjoyed them, but I think I had so many of them that I might have overdone that a little bit. I don't know. So I'm not ruling out the wonderberries. It might live in one of my blank spaces that I have left in the plan, but I'm not 100% positive I want it. And then ground cherries, I also grew. I enjoyed the harvest I got, but I did not dedicate the time I would need to get the volume that I wanted from this. I still have enough so that I can try the jam that I want to make, and that's a good experimenting volume. There's nothing wrong with that. It'll tell me if I enjoyed it enough to make that kind of jam again. So I think I do want more ground cherries, but again, I'm not 100% committed. I only put into the plan the things that I was 100% sure that I wanted. Because if I start with the things that I know I want, I'm going to have a good season. So it's important for me to set aside the things that I'm not feeling passionate about and to commit to the things that I very much want. So that leaves this spinach strawberry. This is something that I did try growing in the greenhouse, and I think I started it too soon. It got too cold. It did not enjoy that, but it sounds delicious. It's an old-fashioned plant, dates back to the 1600s in Europe, produces greens used like spinach, also yields attractive red berries that are nice in fruit salads. Like, doesn't that sound nice? I think that sounds nice. The thing that makes me cautious about utilizing this packet is it says direct sow, which I can probably. And then it says that I need to remove spent blooms. to prevent seed formation and control spreading. Anytime you are going to plant something and the packet says that you're going to need to control spreading, it should make you pause. You should consider if that's something that you are willing to commit to, because that's a warning. And it's a warning that you can't really ignore, particularly if you were trying to economize your space, if you were trying to make the most of what you have. Because what that means is, if it works in your garden, it works. I had a season where I overplanted borage, and fortunately it was very easy to pull up when I did see the leaves. And on the plus side, I got very good at identifying what the leaves looked like for those seedlings. This is entirely new to me. It didn't do well in the greenhouse initially, so it might be something that I also try in a container just to see, because it does sound really good, but it's not something that I want to have accidentally take over my lawn. So these are living in my, I would like to grow them, but I'm not sure where, and I'm not 100% committed to them for the season. So they're in my maybe pile. And I'm actually rather proud of myself that I only have 3 things in my maybe pile. That is, go me. So when I talk about needing to use my spreadsheet system as a means of like broad strokes planning, I am using this to visualize where I want things. As an example, I really like using this center bed in the main garden area full primarily of flowers, just because when I'm walking down the greenhouse path here, coming up to the main garden, I like being able to see this like field of flowers in front of where I normally put the bird bath. I like these archways going into the entrance, and I like the versatility of being able to move where those archways are, so that I am able to change my garden view from season to season. The main thing that I start with here is the image of the season that I've just held on to for things that I'm sure I want to try. So I'm sure that I want cosmos and Nigelia hanging out together. So I put them in this center area, and they can sit in the center of that bed together. They will have like feathery foliage taking up some of that space. And I decided to use either side of that for some summer squash that's going to be this yellow color, both of them. And both of these varieties are bush varieties. So those are not going to need a trellis. They are just going to spill over the side of the bed. So having yellow on either side of those like pinks and blues is just, it's going to be a really beautiful color combination. So that was something I was sure I wanted. So this was something I put in first. The other image that I had in my head as something I wanted to try is I wanted to try putting a squash arch between the kennel bed and what's been the potato bed this season. And I did a similar thing since I knew I wanted squashes over here. And I know how big squash plants can get. They're going to be at the base of them probably 2 foot by 2 foot worth of space. So I put in 3 squashes on this side that will vine up over that squash arch. And then they'll shield some of these cole crops. So I put cole crops over here because they're only going to need about 6 hours of light. This side of the garden will get that. And then it will be dappled light due to the squash vines going over the top. So none of these squashes have such dense leaves that this will be entirely shaded. So I'm still able to grow things under here. I did retain the part of the potato bed for potatoes. It's difficult sometimes for me to remember when I'm going through my seed packets that there are things that I'll get that are tubers and not seeds. So making space right now for potatoes. And then the other thing I'm missing is actually ginger and turmeric. So I need to find a spot for turmeric. There we go. So these spots in the spreadsheet are different parts of the garden. This section is the main garden bed area. So this is the north bed, south bed. Just like in my garden journal, I associate the top of the page or the top of the screen with north, the bottom of the page with south. And then these are my L-shaped beds in the center bed. And then just moving down, I have the kennel bed, which is primarily taken over back here by chives and cilantro. So I'm really only changing the planting plan for the eastern section of that. I've got what was the potato bed here. And then I've got the north greenhouse bed and the south greenhouse bed. And then this essentially represents the exterior of the greenhouse on the south side. So on that west entrance to the greenhouse, I'm going to repeat those Cosmos and Nigelia combo and have it echoed in the center bed of the main garden area. Underneath the squash arch, I have a bunch of cole crops as well as greens, kohlrabis, some onions, and I also made a note that there's smelly herbs that I want to include in here. I would count fennel in that category as well, because around the potato bed and near the kennel bed, I have a pine tree and a family of rabbits lives under there. And so having those smelly herbs works as companion planting, confuses pests that are insects as well as pests that are mammals, like the bunnies. The main garden bed, on the top, I alternated doing things that are like root crops. So I've got onions, I've got carrots, and then I've got beans, as well as different types of kale. So I had 3 different types of kale. I couldn't decide on a singular one, so I put 1 flowering kale, 1 scarlet kale, and then I've got the dinosaur kale. On either side of those, I'm doing different types of lettuce greens. Those will have to be succession sowings, because even though those are in the northernmost bed, which means that they'll get part of the day's sun, not all of it, they're still going to be fairly tender and delicate in the summer heat. So putting them in the back gives them the best chance. It also means that I'll have to plan on doing multiple sowings. Because I committed to 1 type of okra, they are primarily on this west side. And because I like some symmetry in my plan, I also put them near the entrance of the greenhouse where they'll get as much sun as they need. And that will allow me some sort of structure on the east and west side that sort of matches. I did not continue it on the northeast L because I tucked in some cabbages there. This part of the garden is shaded pretty well by the shed. So having things that are a cooler season crop in that area is very helpful for me. Playing off of where I usually put my archways over the entrances to these little L's, I have Cherokee Trail of Tears up here on the northern side, and I did Sunset Runners and this Violetto bean. That should be this like very nice purple color. And then I did cucumbers on the east and west entrances. So I've got Silver Slicer on the east, Straight 8s on the west. The one problem I think I've run into is that if I'm using my cattle panels, 2 of them, so I have 4 full-size cattle panels, which means they're 16 feet long. If I'm using 2 of them in this squash archway, I only have 2 more in the main garden, which is fine. It's just that I need to plan where those are going to go. And my initial plan was that I would take them and try running them across the length of the main garden bed here, because they are 4 feet wide. So they would take up this entirety here, which interferes with these trellises that the beans would be on. That's not necessarily a problem, because what I can do is I can turn these trellises so that the narrow ones go across these main walkways, but it's just considering how I want that plan to look. And what it might mean is that in order to brace those properly, I might need to move them so that they line up with where the end of this long full-size cattle panel is. That's something that I'm not 100% on, except that I know I will only have so many full-size cattle panels that I want to use, and I'm very sure that I want this squash arch, which means 2 of them are gone. So just when you're doing your garden plan, be aware of the resources you have, and if you're intending to get more, to change your plan, or if you want to do the same plan every year. I could continue what I did last season and not put squash arches over by the kennel bed, and I could just leave them in the main garden. I did like how that looks, but I like to change up the plan a little bit every season, try different things, see what works. So at the moment, I'm planning on having squashes in the center area and tucking beets underneath a lot of these, leeks under some other ones, some sesame, some fenugreek, different types of seasonings. I'm also planning on having cherry tomatoes in this area. I can run them up a pole and brace it in that cattle panel. That would be just fine. I've got different spots for carrots tucked in here because I didn't have enough carrots this past season and I want more of them. And then in the southern bed of the main garden area, I'm primarily doing things like onions, hot peppers, storage onions. I've got some full-size tomatoes. I tried Fermenimo's plum in the greenhouse this past season. I do want to try it out of the greenhouse, see how it performs. Basil and tomato are good companion plants. I like those together. And then I've got red of Florence onions here. I've got a purple jalapeno next to my purple heart tomato. Why not? More yellow of Parma because that's good storage onions. And back to my list that I made for things I want for 2024, I want to be self-sufficient in onions again. I was not this past season. Like I have enough, but it's not enough. I don't know. So then I've got basil, black crim. That's a repeat for me. I've got some early jalapenos. That's from Territorial Seed. And then I've got Globo onions. I've got that in a couple different spots, mostly because I wanted to see how that would perform. And then I've got a sizable portion of edamame that I'll need to continue to succession. So I've got a good amount of beans, a good amount of squash, and then I've made an effort to include more greens out in the main garden, as well as enough cucumbers that I can have them for fresh eating. So then moving into the greenhouse. I did not try to fill the greenhouse plan to bursting, but I did try to think of it as how I wanted that space to look and feel. Last season, I had most of my tomatoes in just like this, like this half of the northern bed. And that was me trying to make an effort to do some of those really beautiful like block pattern plantings where you would have like a row of basils here, and then a row of turmeric, and then a row of something else. I don't know. So it's just like a very partitioned, beautiful, pastoral almost setting. It's gorgeous. I love that when I see photos of it. But I found that I did not like it in practice in my garden. So I changed up how I did that. You'll notice that I have all of my hot peppers in the main garden area. That's on purpose. All of my sweet peppers are in the greenhouse. Part of that was because I have less sweet pepper plants that I'm wanting to start for varieties, and I had more hot pepper plants that I wanted to have for varieties. So I had more space in the main garden, less space in the greenhouse. That was mainly why I made that choice. Other things that I'm putting in the greenhouse, because they are warm season, they really like that sort of thing. Cucamelons I want back in the greenhouse. I think they did really well. I really liked that. I liked watermelon in the greenhouse. Eggplant should do really well in the greenhouse. So should the turmeric and ginger. Those I tried in containers this past season. I didn't get as good of a harvest as I wanted. So I want those specifically in the garden beds, in the greenhouse this coming season to hopefully get a better harvest from them. I've got Gatherer's Gold Sweet Italian Pepper. I'm just gonna make a row of him here. I put him in a couple spots. And then I've got a shishito pepper. It's an F1 hybrid. It should be delicious. And then I'm bringing back King of the North I'll put him up here in the corner. And everything else should be like tomatoes. I'm repeating the glacier tomato from this past season, as well as the German pink and the summer sunrise. What I'm bringing back from like 2 gardening seasons ago. I missed my pineapple like Oxheart variety of tomato. Like I actively enjoyed having that in the garden a couple years ago, and not having it this past year, I noticed. Same thing with the Coeur Debut. That one is also an Oxheart style tomato, very sizable, was a beautiful plant. I think it was like a potato leaf variety. So I've missed having those. So I put them back in my list this season. And I have 2 that are new to me. And I do try to grow 2 new varieties of tomatoes each season, just to see how I like them. And maybe they become something like the pineapple tomato that I miss going forward. So I've got Kellogg's Breakfast, which I've heard really good things about, and I've never tried it. Same thing with Thorburns Terracotta. That one looks beautiful. I want to see if it tastes beautiful. And so we're going to try those and see how they turn out. But I thought of tomatoes in the greenhouse this coming year to be more like pillars. I didn't like them all clumped together. So here are my pillars of tomatoes in the greenhouse. Those should provide an adequate amount of spacing so that I can work with the plants more easily, and there's good airflow, good light coming through. Beyond that, I'm tucking in some herbs in here as well. So basil, I'll pop in any place I can because we love basil, it's delicious. But it's also a very good companion plant for pretty much everything. If you're not sure what a companion plant is good for, like next to, there's oodles of potential references you can use. Just do a general internet search on your favorite browser and you'll find it. I enjoyed having an extended season of chamomile in the greenhouse. That was very nice. I'm not necessarily sold that this is the spot it'll be in, but I'll make some space between nasturtiums and everything else that's living in there, like the oregano and the chives. And then there's some things that I want to put in here that are warmer season crops. So cumin is not something that's like native to my area. I think it would like to be in the greenhouse, and I'm debating if I want to put something like the fenugreek and the sesame in here as well. That might be worth it. There's spaces in the greenhouse on purpose. Part of that is because I know I'm going to have some extras of different things, and so I want to put them in some of these spots. Other herbs I enjoyed having a longer span of time to harvest from was calendula. Calendula you can use in tea. You can also, I predominantly use it in salves. The petals are edible. It's an edible flower, so is the nasturtium, so is the chamomile. So having those types of things in the greenhouse is really nice. It extends the amount of time during the season that I can use them. Lemon bee balm, I grew, it's an annual. I grew it in the herb circle last season. I want to pop it in the greenhouse this season. I liked all of the pollinators that were on that, and I think it would be a really nice addition to next to the pathway in the greenhouse. The south side of the greenhouse is pretty much given over to garlic, strawberries, and chives over and over again. I also have the perennial that's native to my area for prairie smoke. If you look up a photo of prairie smoke flowers, they look like they belong in like a Dr. Seuss movie. It's just this cotton candy fluff on a stick. It's really cool. And then I want to put the tobacco jasmine right by the entrance over here as well. That was stunning, blew me away. I absolutely enjoyed that. But I don't want to give space to it in the greenhouse. I want to prioritize that for things that are edible or used in tea. And then borage is also edible. It's good for a lot of different things. It's prolific. Having it on the corner down here by my Cosmos Nigelia, by the solar panel, it'll be out of the way. If it spills into the lawn, it's fine. It's very easy to pull out those seedlings. They're very distinctive, almost like fuzzy. But borage flowers are also edible, and you can, if you want to be fancy, put them in your ice cube trays and freeze them into little ice cubes, and then put that in your lemonade glass in the summer, and it's just like, wouldn't that be really pretty? It's It's fancy. I want to be that hostess. I'm not that hostess, but maybe now that you know about it, you can be that hostess. Host, whatever. This has been the best way that I've found to be able to easily copy and paste something if I want to move it, hit delete if that wasn't what I was looking for, and refilling it in with something new. This is, I think, for me, just a tool to solidify the plan before I put it in my garden journal. And if I change it while I'm out in the garden journal goes with me so that I can make that change reflected or note in the side of the margin. But noting what I did is how I know 5 years from now what did or didn't work well in my region, what type of weather I was experiencing that I had to wait to plant some of the warmer things, because I can plan in my spreadsheet when I'm going to start seeds. But if the forecast just doesn't match the average last frost date, then it throws off the whole plan. But I've been doing this process since, well, in this spreadsheet since 2021. I had a less beautiful spreadsheet prior to that, but this is what I've been using as like the best way for me to get a good idea of what it is I want where in the main garden space. So that has been the overview of my process as a whole. I go through how the season went in the previous seasons, what it is that I'm hoping to improve upon this season, and I write those down so I have something to reference. And then I go through every seed packet that I have to narrow down what I want to grow that season. And if you're at all familiar with the Marie Kondo, like sorting your house things, I prioritize the things that spark joy. So the things that I really want, those go first. The things that I need, I'm putting in next. And anything after that is a playground. Basically, I get to try something new. And I think it's really important to have the spaces in your garden where you can try something new. Learning new things is what keeps me coming back to this. So if you're able to prioritize that as the start of your seed planning journey, then you're setting yourself up for a good garden season. There is a second part to my seed starting plan for the garden season, and that is taking the list of things that I narrowed down and drilling down further to like a calendar view of, if I want to start onions and put them in the ground, when do I need to start the seeds? Because I am mostly growing from seed packets, it's important that I have a plan. And if you are somebody who it's out of sight, out of mind, you can go so far as to, once you've determined which dates you need to start which crops, you can put them as events in your calendar so it prompts you with a reminder. Whatever it is that you need, take an afternoon, set up your plan, and then make it actionable in a way that works for you. This video is just where it's going to lay out in the garden. Next week's video is going to be how I know when I'm starting those seeds. And so you can pick whichever part of this journey works for you. If you've used something entirely different that's not mentioned here that you've found great success with, then leave that in the comments below. I'm always interested in how other people do their process, because you and I can have the same amount of garden space and how we feel that it is entirely different. And I am endlessly fascinated by that. I think that's super cool. Thanks for coming along with me, and I'll catch you next time.